Recently, we, clergy educators, have been meeting with parents of Hebrew school kids in our Jewels program, and asking you, parents, what is it that's most on your mind? What is it that's troubling you, concerning you, that you'd like us to address in educating your kids during the course of this year? And I've also heard from some of you directly who have contacted me via email and asked, will I be talking about Kanye West and Kyrie Irving and rising anti-Semitism? So yes, here's a brief thought on that certainly won't do such a vast topic justice, but hopefully will at least be the beginning of a conversation we can have about it, an evolving conversation, one that surely will continue because anti-Semitism isn't going away. If I'm a predictor, and I'm not, a prophet, and I'm not, I would say it's going to rise, certainly between the midterms and the general election in this country, because that tends to be what happens, and I want to address the reasons for that. But first, I want to just ask you to think about Kyrie Irving, the basketball player, Kanye West, the megastar, genius, musical genius, and your kids. And maybe you have an opportunity that you may have had in the abstract, but now you have in a way that's more concrete and real, to sit down with your kids and talk about idolization. I don't mean just in the sense of, biblical idolatry, but it is a form of that. It's creating demigods or gods out of men and women, and in this case, athletes and superstar singers and producers. Whom do our kids admire in this society most? I bet if they're surveyed, they're going to say they want to be most like these guys, these people, Taylor Swift, these fantastic performers in our society. But I want to ask you as parents, whom do you want them to be most like? Who are the people? What's your short list of people whom you'd like your kids to grow up to be most similar to? And my hope is that you wouldn't be pointing out the rich and the famous, but in fact, instead, you'd be thinking about people who have good character, who are living good lives. And here we see the split between the talent of one of these guys and the character or lack of character in both of them. Why does it matter? Really, we shouldn't be talking about them. It's just one, two individuals sharing posts. People do that every day. But you and I know that those two particular human beings have the eyes and ears of millions and millions of people, and it's exponential because those people then share those vile anti-Semitic posts with others, and on and on and on. So it's not like the olden days when in a village the word would get around and and then 1,000 people would know that gossip or even that lie. But now it's hundreds of millions of people who believe it, either because they believe the source, the basketball player, or the music superstar, or because they believe the lie, because they've been fed it in forms, in versions over many years, or even generations of their family. Now, you might want to have another conversation with your kids, which is why? Mommy, they might ask, why do people hate Jews? I remember a boy asking me that exact question. I think the best thing to do with kids isn't to globalize the answer, but instead to bring it down to size and ask the child and talk to your kids about their own experiences of the other in their little societies, in their groups of friends, on the schoolyard. Who is it that is left out, who is seen as different, who is seen as less than because of the color of their hair or their skin or the way they dress or the way they speak, or their ability or disability, or their height, or anything else, any of these other reasons that kids already at their young ages decide to ostracize one person or several people from the acceptable group. So we do that in our little tribes as children, and then it gets more and more sinister as we get older. So I think it's also worth having a conversation with the kids about Jews and then saying, well, we, the Jewish people, have always been that boy outside the circle or that girl. We've always been the minority in every country in which we've lived. We've been different. We've worn different clothing. We've had different customs, which means that people are suspicious of us because people are always suspicious of the other, of people who do things and live differently. Think about the Sikh child at school, or the Muslim girl wearing a hijab at school, or any of the differences, the boy wearing a kippah, or any of the other cultural differences that we see just as indicators of a person's otherness. Jews have been ostracized from the society in which they've lived. They've been kept apart for as long as we've been Jews. There's a great book, and I want to recommend it for anybody who's really wants to be thoughtful about this and read slowly and take time. It's a fantastic source. It's not called anti-Semitism, it's called Anti-Judaism. Anti-Judaism, the Western Tradition. And it's by David Nirenberg. David Nirenberg is a University of Chicago professor. There's a fantastic understanding of the history that's led to the current day, which is what we call rising anti-Semitism. But you and I may think that anti-Semitism originated in the Catholic Church or the early church, which it was, but it didn't originate there. In fact, if you follow Nirenberg's thoughts, it originated in pre-church Egypt. Even when there were Greek pharaohs in that period, they didn't know what to do with these others in their society who had their other god and other ways of living and even other morals and ethics, and they were the Israelites. So before we got to this point in our history, we know there have been thousands and thousands of years of anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, people being pointed out and people being left out because of being Jewish. So what happens with resourceful people when they're left out? They find other ways to create their livelihoods. As an example, people say, as Kyrie Irving's purported bestseller, the book he's suggesting people read, or the video which has been shown to be full of lies, which is saying that Jews are powerful and out to get black people, which is nonsense. But what's the idea? And remember, this is in Kanye's narrative as well. Jews are all powerful when he says what he said about Jews. So what's the idea? It's not just the Jews have risen to great levels, which we have, more Nobel Prizes than any other group per capita. I mean, think about more patents than any other group per capita in the world. Think about all the doctors, all the medical advances, all the cures that have come to society, human society, because of Jews. So what they do point out is where Jews have power, for instance, are Hollywood, which means the media, the messaging, and the other is banking. Well, let's just think for a second, without going into an in-depth history of Jews in Hollywood and Jews in banking. Go back to a couple hundred years ago in Europe, where Jewish people weren't allowed to have respectable professions. So they were given professions that weren't considered to be clean or respectable. And one of them was handling the money for the non-Jews, for the Gentiles. So that's how we ended up forming a profession, which is banking. And of course, if you look at the great banks in New York, they often have Jewish names attached to them. Now, what about another question, which is Jews in Hollywood? Yes, there are many Jews in Hollywood. It's traditionally been a Jewish business. Why? Because here in Los Angeles, of all places, the land of the free and the brave, Jewish people weren't allowed into professions, so they formed their own profession. They called it Hollywood, right? That's the profession formed by Jews. And these days, it's hardly a Jewish profession. It's much more diverse than that, but there's certainly a sense of a Jewish presence in it. You should ask yourself, as I do, what difference does that presence make? Are Jews feeding us a line of pro-Jewish media? No, it doesn't seem to exist. I wish it would. Are they suddenly giving us pro-Israel movies and TVs and scripts in Hollywood? Barely one. Can't think of any, so few. So if anything, the Jews have been hypercritical of Jews and have portrayed Jews in ways that we found offensive as well. I want you just to be thoughtful about the fact that this is something that has always been, and I believe will always be, but that shouldn't be a reason to take it lightly, not to take it seriously, because Jews die because of words that are said about us. It's really a reality. The words that are written and said and shared and propagated across the world are what have killed Jewish people, murdered them for millennia. Think about all of the pogroms, all of the history of German propaganda, not just Mein Kampf, but posters. Think about what's been done in writing, the equivalent today of an Instagram post, or in messaging, speeches, the equivalent today of an Instagram post. Think about how powerful these words are in shaping the hearts and minds of people who might otherwise not have had those understandings of Jews, or maybe not been influenced by the influencer, the messenger sharing that deceitful and damaging message. So there's a lot to say when you're thinking about anti-Semitism, bigotry, hatred. I believe I said earlier, I at least had the flashing thought that I think it'll rise in the next couple of years. I think we need to be very careful about it. I think we need to, whenever we get a chance, whether we're Jewish or not watching this video, dispel myths and lies. And when we hear them, challenge people kindly, but just to say respectfully, let's just backtrack on what you just said for a moment. Let's challenge that thought because it's offensive, because it's false, because actually it's dangerous, because you wouldn't want it said about you or your own children. One of the things that I do personally, as you know, as an extension of our synagogue's outreach, is a lot of interreligious work. And the point of interreligious work, as some people see it, isn't to make people like the Jews. That's not been the point of it ever, even for somebody like myself being engaged in it. Instead, in this case, in my case, it's working now with influencers in the world, not just in our own society here. That's heads of state, foreign ministers, ministers of government, men and women across the globe, to see what can be changed through quiet, calm conversations, the kinship between faith leaders who should be representing the conscience of humanity and the people who are leading humanity. So I'm doing my best. I think we should all do our best to do what we can in the days and months and years ahead, not only in relation to our country. I think that's the only way to save it, through words, kind ones and truthful ones, but also to speak to one another and to share a vision for a better future, so that anti-Semitism isn't the only color on the palette of our lives. It isn't the only story that we tell. I hope this is helpful. I'm sure it's not enough. I'm sure there were holes in it. It wasn't scripted, so I'm sure that I left certain things out or maybe even misspoke. If I said something that's inaccurate or incorrect, please make a comment underneath. I welcome it. If you have questions or comments anyway, then please leave them below. I welcome a conversation with you, not just a talk to you.